I never expected the end of my career to begin with a handshake that lasted a second too long. The gym was almost empty that afternoon, the way it always got once the younger guys finished their sessions and rushed off to whatever came next in their lives. I'd already cleaned out my locker. No more tape rolls with my name scribbled on them. No more cracked water bottle wedged in the corner. Just a duffel bag at my feet and the quiet hum of fluorescent lights overhead. That's when Duncan Hale walked in. He didn't say anything at first. Just nodded, that familiar, measured nod I'd known for years. The one that always meant I see you, and I know exactly how hard you're pushing yourself. Duncan had been my coach since my late 20s, back when I still thought my body would last forever if I just trained smarter. "Well," he finally said, voice low, steady. "That's it, huh?" I laughed, but it came out thinner than I expected. "Looks like it." I'm Caleb Morrison, and for most of my adult life, I was an athlete before I was anything else. The sport shaped everything: how I ate, how I slept, how I measured my worth. Duncan was there through all of it. Injuries, comebacks, the slow realization that recovery takes longer every year, until one day, it doesn't quite come at all. We stood there facing each other, two grown men who had spent years pretending emotions fit neatly into training plans. "You gave it everything," he said. "You know that." "I know," I replied. And I did. That wasn't the hard part. The hard part was the silence that followed. The unspoken truth that our relationship, defined so clearly by whistles, schedules, and boundaries, had just changed shape. Duncan extended his hand. Professional, clean, final. I took it. But neither of us let go right away. It wasn't dramatic. No sudden rush of realization. Just a subtle awareness that something had shifted, like the moment after a race when your legs finally stop shaking and you notice how loud your breathing is. "Stay in touch," he said, finally releasing my hand. "I will," I answered. And this time I meant it in a way that surprised me. I walked out of the gym feeling lighter and heavier at the same time. Lighter because the grind was over. Heavier because I had no idea who I was without it. And, unexpectedly, because Duncan's presence no longer had a rulebook. Over the next few weeks, I adjusted to civilian life. No more early morning alarms. No more taped ankles. Friends congratulated me, told me I'd earned the rest. I smiled, nodded, played the part of the guy who was at peace with moving on. Then Duncan texted me. "Coffee? My treat. No coaching, just coffee." I stared at the message longer than I should have. Because without the titles, coach and athlete, what were we? I typed back before I could overthink it. "Yeah, I'd like that." And that was the moment I realized something uncomfortable and undeniable had been there all along. Quiet, respectful, and waiting for the rules to disappear. We met at a small cafe halfway between the gym and my apartment. Neutral territory. That felt intentional, even if neither of us said it out loud. Duncan was already there when I walked in, sitting by the window with his jacket folded over the back of the chair. No clipboard, no stopwatch. Just him, scrolling on his phone like a regular guy killing time. That alone threw me off. "Hey," I said, suddenly aware of how weird it felt not to be wearing training gear around him. He looked up and smiled, not the tight professional version I was used to. This one reached his eyes. "Hey, you made it." I sat across from him, hands wrapped around my coffee cup like it was an anchor. For a moment, neither of us spoke. The silence wasn't awkward exactly. It was cautious, like we were both testing how much space we were allowed to take now. "So," he said finally, "how does it feel waking up without a schedule trying to kill you?" I snorted. "Honestly, terrifying. I keep thinking I'm forgetting something." He laughed, shaking his head. "Yeah, I've seen that look before. Retired guys either love it or lose their minds." "And you?" I asked before I could stop myself. "How does it feel not being my coach anymore?" That got his attention. He leaned back slightly, considering the question. "Different," he said. Quieter. Something in his tone made my chest tighten. Duncan had always been steady, controlled. Seeing him search for words felt strangely intimate. We talked for over an hour, about stupid things, movies we liked, how he'd gotten into coaching, how I was thinking about maybe going back to school, or maybe not. There was an ease to it I hadn't expected, like all the pressure had evaporated the moment the roles disappeared. At some point, I noticed how close his hands were to mine on the table. Not touching, just there. I noticed a lot of things after that. The way his sleeves rode up when he gestured, revealing forearms I'd seen 1,000 times but never really looked at. The way his voice dropped when the cafe got louder. The fact that he listened to me now without analyzing, correcting, or planning my next move. When we finally stood to leave, the afternoon light had shifted, turning everything gold. "We should do this again," he said like it was the most natural idea in the world. "Yeah," I replied. "We should." Walking home, I tried to tell myself it was just friendship. Two guys who'd shared years of intense work finding common ground outside of it. That made sense. That was safe. But later that night, lying in bed, I replayed the way Duncan had looked at me when I talked about my fears. Not like a coach evaluating an athlete, but like a man seeing another man fully, maybe for the first time. The next time we met, it wasn't coffee. It was a walk along the river, then dinner, then a late-night text that had nothing to do with training or recovery or discipline. You ever miss it? He wrote one night, "I knew he didn't mean the sport." "Sometimes," I typed back. "But I don't miss feeling trapped." There was a pause before his reply. "Me neither." That was when I realized we were circling something neither of us was ready to name yet. Something built on years of mutual respect, restraint, and unspoken understanding. And now that the rules were gone, the gravity between us felt impossible to ignore. The first time things felt dangerously close was at Duncan's place. He'd invited me over without making a big deal out of it. Just a casual, "I'm making too much food, you want to help me get rid of it?" kind of invite. Normal. Harmless. That's what I told myself while I stood outside his apartment door, suddenly aware that I'd never been inside his life before, only the controlled, professional version of it. He opened the door barefoot, wearing jeans and an old t-shirt I'd never seen before. No team logo, no authority stitched into the fabric. "Hey," he said softly. "Hey." That word carried more weight than it should have. His place was simple, clean, but lived in. Books stacked unevenly on a shelf. Framed photos I paused at without meaning to. Him with former teams. Younger, louder versions of the man in front of me. One picture caught my eye. Duncan standing with his arm around an athlete who'd clearly just won something big. Pride written all over his face. "You keep everything," I said. He shrugged. "Helps me remember why I do it." Dinner was easy. Too easy. We moved around each other in the kitchen like we'd done it before, even though we hadn't. Passing plates. Brushing past one another in narrow spaces. Each near contact sent a quiet jolt through me that I tried not to acknowledge. Afterward, we sat on opposite ends of the couch, plates abandoned on the coffee table. Some documentary played in the background, but neither of us was watching it. "I used to worry about this," he said suddenly. "About what?" "Crossing lines." He didn't look at me when he said it. His eyes stayed on the darkened window. Not doing anything wrong, just feeling things I wasn't supposed to feel. My heart picked up speed. While I was still competing? Yes. He turned then, finally meeting my gaze. There was no guilt there, just honesty. "That's why I kept my distance. Probably seemed cold sometimes." I swallowed. "I thought you just didn't like me much." That made him laugh, short and surprised. "Caleb." That was never the problem. Silence stretched between us, thick but not uncomfortable. It felt earned. "I wouldn't have let anything happen," he continued. "Not then. I owed you more than that." I nodded slowly. Respect. That word had always defined us. And now, strangely, it was the thing pulling us closer instead of keeping us apart. "I don't feel confused anymore," I admitted. "About who I am. About what I want. I just Didn't expect this to be part of it. Neither did I, he said. But I don't regret acknowledging it now. Our knees were closer than they had been before. Not touching. Close enough to notice the heat. I don't want to mess this up, I said quietly. Me neither. This time, when our eyes locked, neither of us looked away. He reached out, not to pull me in, not to rush anything, but to rest his hand over mine. Solid, steady, a question instead of an answer. I let my fingers curl into his. That was it. No kiss, no dramatic moment, just the understanding that whatever was growing between us wasn't built on impulse. It was built on years of discipline, restraint, and trust finally given room to breathe. When I left later that night, I felt lighter than I had since the end of my career. Not because something had happened, but because something real had finally been allowed to begin. The shift from almost to something didn't happen all at once. It came in quiet moments. Texts that lingered unanswered because we were both choosing our words too carefully. Long pauses during conversations where neither of us rushed to fill the space. The slow realization that I was starting to structure my days around the possibility of seeing Duncan and that he was doing the same. We didn't talk about it directly at first. We didn't need to. Instead, he showed up. When I mentioned offhand that retirement felt louder than I'd expected, he invited me to join him on an early morning walk. No agenda, just moving. When I admitted I felt disconnected from my body, without the discipline of training, he suggested yoga, then laughed when I raised an eyebrow and said, "You don't have to be good at it. That's kind of the point." I noticed the way he watched me differently now. Not assessing, not correcting, just attentive, like he was learning me again, without the lens of performance. One afternoon, we ended up back at the gym. Not to train, just to say hi to a few people I'd grown up alongside. I expected it to feel strange. What I didn't expect was how grounding it felt to walk in next to him as an equal. Someone clapped me on the shoulder. Another asked what I was doing next. Duncan stood close enough that our arms brushed, casual but intentional. "You good?" he murmured under his breath. "Yeah," I said. And for once, it wasn't a lie. Later, sitting in his car outside the building, the engine idling, neither of us moved to leave. "I worried you'd resent me," he admitted suddenly. "For what?" "For not pushing you to stay longer. For agreeing when you said you were done." I turned toward him. "You listened. That's not something to apologize for." He nodded, jaw tightening briefly. I spent years thinking my job was to push. Took me a long time to learn when not to. That vulnerability, that quiet self-reflection, hit me harder than any grand gesture could have. "I don't feel like you took anything from me," I said. "If anything, you gave me room to leave on my own terms." Our eyes met. Something unspoken passed between us. Gratitude, relief, maybe something softer. It was raining lightly when we finally stepped out of the car. Duncan hesitated, then reached for my hand as we crossed the parking lot. Not hidden, not dramatic, just natural. I didn't pull away. We stopped under the overhang outside his building, rain tapping steadily around us. He turned to face me, close enough now that I could feel his breath. "This is okay?" he asked. Yes, that was all it took. He leaned in slowly, giving me time to change my mind. When our lips met, it was gentle, careful, like we both understood how much history sat behind that simple touch. No rush, no hunger, just certainty. When we pulled back, he smiled, soft, unguarded. "Guess we're doing this," he said. I laughed quietly. "Guess we are." For the first time since I'd stepped away from the sport that defined me, I didn't feel like I was losing something. I felt like I was choosing something new. Being with Duncan didn't feel like stepping into something forbidden. It felt like exhaling after holding my breath for years. That surprised me more than anything. I'd expected confusion, guilt, maybe some lingering sense that we were doing something wrong, even if the timing was technically right. But none of that showed up. What settled in instead was a quiet sense of alignment, like two lines that had been running parallel for a long time, finally allowed to curve toward each other. We took it slow on purpose, not because we lacked desire. If anything, the restraint made every glance heavier, but because we both knew how much weight our history carried. Duncan had spent years being careful with me. I had spent years trusting him with my body, my limits, my future. Neither of us wanted to cheapen that by rushing, so intimacy showed up in other ways first. Mornings, mostly. I'd stay over at his place, sleeping on opposite sides of the bed at first, like muscle memory didn't quite know what to do yet. We'd wake up early out of habit, bodies wired for movement, even when there was nowhere we had to be. Sometimes we'd make coffee and sit in silence, legs brushing under the table. Other times we'd talk, really talk, about things we'd never touched before. He told me about the pressure of being the steady one for so many people, how coaching didn't stop when the whistle blew, how carrying responsibility long enough starts to feel like part of your skeleton. I told him about the fear of becoming irrelevant, about how much of my identity was tied to being useful, to performing, improving, proving, how stepping away felt less like retirement and more like a small death I hadn't admitted out loud. He listened the same way he always had. But now, when he reached for me, it wasn't to adjust my posture or correct my form. It was to ground me. One night, after a long walk through the city, we ended up back on his couch. The lights were low, the windows were open, summer air carried in distant traffic and the sound of people living their lives. I leaned back, head against the cushion, and felt his arms settle around my shoulders. Instinctively, I leaned into him. "That okay?" he asked quietly. "Yeah," I said. Then, after a beat, "More than okay." He kissed my temple. Just that, and something in my chest loosened. When we finally crossed that last line, when hands stopped hesitating and mouths stopped holding back, it wasn't explosive. It was deliberate, intentional, like we were honoring something rather than taking it. Afterward, we lay tangled together, breathing slowly, the room warm and quiet. "I never wanted to be someone who took advantage," he said, softly, staring at the ceiling. "You weren't," I replied without hesitation. I turned onto my side, propping myself up to look at him. "You respected me when it mattered most." He met my gaze, eyes unreadable for a moment. Then he nodded. "That's why this feels earned," he said. I smiled. "Yeah, it does." Later, walking home alone, I realized something else had shifted. I wasn't just adjusting to life after sport anymore. I was building a life with someone, one rooted not in roles or expectations, but in mutual respect that had finally been allowed to turn into something deeper. And for the first time in a long while, the future didn't feel like an empty stretch of road. It felt shared. The first time someone asked about us, it wasn't dramatic. It was a casual comment from an old teammate who ran into us at a grocery store. He looked between Duncan and me, then smirked. "You two start coordinating outfits now, or is that just coincidence?" Duncan didn't flinch. Neither did I. "We grab food together sometimes," he said easily. Honest, but not defensive. The guy nodded, accepted it, and moved on. But as we walked out to the parking lot, groceries in hand, I realized something important. I wasn't bracing myself anymore. Not for judgment, not for whispers, not even for the internal voice that used to ask. "Are you allowed to want this?" Duncan noticed. "You okay?" he asked, loading bags into the trunk. "Yeah," I said. Just noticing how normal this feels. He smiled at that. Normal can be underrated. We still moved carefully in public, not out of fear, but out of respect for the lives we were both still navigating. Coaching circles were small, athletic communities even smaller. Duncan was aware that people would talk eventually, and I appreciated how thoughtfully he handled that reality. "I don't want you feeling like a secret," he told me one night. "I don't," I said honestly. "I just don't need an announcement either." That balance mattered to both of us. What surprised me most was how much space Duncan gave me to figure out who I was becoming. He never tried to replace the structure I'd lost. He didn't push me toward a new identity or rush me into plans. When I talked about uncertainty, about maybe mentoring younger athletes or maybe doing something completely different, He listened without steering. "You don't owe anyone a second act immediately," he said once. "Rest counts." That line stuck with me. Slowly, I started to feel less like a former athlete and more like a whole person again. I picked up old interests, reconnected with friends I'd sidelined for training schedules. I even started helping out part-time at a community program. Nothing intense, just enough to stay connected without burning myself out. Duncan came with me one evening, leaning against the wall while I worked with a group of teens. I caught him watching me, not with the critical eye of a coach, but with quiet pride. Later, as we walked home, he said, "You're good with them." "I know," I replied. "That's new," he laughed. "You've always been more than one thing. You just didn't have time to see it." That night, lying next to him, I realized how different this relationship felt from anything I'd known before. There was no power imbalance left to navigate, no roles to maintain. Just two men choosing each other with open eyes. The respect that had once kept us carefully apart was now the foundation holding us steady together. And for the first time, I wasn't afraid of what came next. I was curious. The first real test didn't come from the outside world. It came from us. It was a quiet Sunday evening at Duncan's place, the kind where time stretches and you don't notice it passing until the sky outside the windows starts to dim. We'd spent most of the day doing nothing in particular, reading, half watching a game on TV, cooking something that took longer than it should have because we kept getting distracted. I was washing dishes when it hit me, that familiar tightening in my chest, the one I used to get before big competitions. The sense that something was about to change and I didn't have a script for how to handle it. Duncan noticed immediately. Of course he did. "You just went somewhere," he said, drying his hands on a towel. "Want to tell me where?" I leaned against the counter, exhaling slowly. "I think I'm scared." He didn't interrupt. He never did. Us. It's good," I continued. "Really good. And that's what makes it terrifying. My whole life, I've known what was expected of me. Train, perform, improve. Even retiring had a kind of structure to it. But this? I gestured vaguely between us. This feels like something I could actually lose. Duncan set the towel down and stepped closer, not crowding me, just present. "You know you don't have to be perfect at this, right?" I laughed softly. That might be the hardest thing anyone's ever said to me. He smiled, then grew serious. "Caleb, I don't want to be another thing you feel like you have to execute flawlessly. I don't want to be your next discipline." That landed. "I don't want that either," I admitted. "I just don't know how to unlearn it yet." He reached out, resting his forehead briefly against mine. Then we learned something new, together. No stopwatch. That night, lying in bed with his arm around me, I realized how different this fear was from the ones I'd known before. It wasn't about failure. It was about vulnerability, about letting myself be seen without armor. A few weeks later, the world caught up. Someone at the gym mentioned us. Not maliciously, just curious. Word traveled the way it always does in tight-knit communities. Duncan handled it with the same calm integrity he brought to everything else. No denial. No details. Just honesty. "Yes, we're together. No, there was nothing inappropriate. Yes, I'm aware of the optics." Most people accepted it. A few didn't. That was fine. What mattered was that he checked in with me constantly, not because he doubted us, but because he respected how much the transition meant for me. "Still okay?" he'd ask. And, more often than not, I found myself answering, "Yeah, I really am." One evening, as we walked home after dinner, I realized something else had shifted. I wasn't measuring myself anymore, not against my past, not against expectations, not even against Duncan. I was just here, with him, in my body, in my life. We stopped at a crosswalk, waiting for the light. Duncan squeezed my hand once, absent-minded, like it was the most natural thing in the world. And it was. I didn't know exactly where we were going. Careers change. Bodies change. Life keeps moving, whether you're ready or not. But standing there beside him, I knew one thing for sure. For the first time, I wasn't running toward something or away from something. I was choosing someone. And that felt like the strongest finish I could have imagined. The thing about endings is that they rarely announce themselves. There was no grand moment where everything clicked into place, no sweeping realization that this is it. Instead, the certainty crept in quietly, the way it always had with Duncan. Steady, patient, undeniable once you noticed it. It happened on a random Tuesday. I'd been accepted into a certification program to work with transitioning athletes, guys and women stepping out of competitive careers and trying to figure out who they were without the roar of a crowd or the tyranny of a clock. I stared at the email longer than necessary, feeling that old mix of excitement and doubt rise up. When Duncan got home, I handed him my phone without saying anything. He read it once, then again. "Well," he said finally, looking up at me with that calm, proud expression I knew so well. "Looks like you found your next chapter. You don't think it's too soon?" I asked. "Or too obvious?" He shook his head. "You're not repeating your past. You're translating it." That stuck with me. A few months later, I stood in a small gym. Not my gym, not his gym, watching a group of former athletes talk openly about loss, identity, and fear, in a way I'd never been able to when I was still competing. I wasn't leading them like a coach. I wasn't performing. I was listening. Duncan sat off to the side, unobtrusive, exactly the way he always knew how to be. When our eyes met, he gave me a small nod, not approval, trust. Later that night, we walked home together, the city buzzing softly around us. I said, "If you'd told me a year ago this is where I'd be, I would have laughed." He smiled. "If you'd told me a year ago I'd be here, with you, I would have told you it was impossible." We stopped outside my building. At some point, my place had quietly become our place, though neither of us had felt the need to label it. "I don't feel like I'm missing anything anymore," I said, almost surprised by my own words. Duncan reached for my hand, fingers familiar, grounding. "That's usually how you know." We went upstairs together. No rush, no urgency, just the comfort of shared space and shared silence. Lying in bed later, his arm warm around my waist, I thought about how much of my life had been about pushing forward. Faster, harder, stronger. How much I'd believed love, like sport, had to be earned through effort and endurance. But this had grown from patience, from respect, from knowing when not to cross a line, and recognizing when that line no longer existed. I turned slightly, pressing a kiss to his shoulder. He stirred, smiled in his sleep, and pulled me closer without waking. That was when it hit me. The strongest thing I'd ever done wasn't winning or surviving injuries or knowing when to quit. It was allowing myself to be chosen and choosing back, not as a coach, not as an athlete, just as a man, in love, at peace with where he'd landed.